David sat at the kitchen counter, staring blankly at the half-empty coffee mug in front of him. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of their modern urban apartment, illuminating the sleek furniture, the polished floors, and the emptiness that seemed to stretch between him and Maya. Maya moved around the kitchen silently, placing plates on the table, her hands moving with practiced care. She hummed softly, but the tune was weak, almost forced. Her eyes darted to David, searching for any sign that he might meet her halfway. "Did you sleep well?" she asked tentatively. David grunted, eyes fixed on his mug. "I made your eggs," Maya continued, trying to break the cold silence. "Thought you might." "I'm not hungry," David interrupted, his voice flat. He didn't look at her. A quiet tension filled the room, heavier than the morning light. This was the rhythm of their life now. Small silences, unanswered questions, and the faint ache of a love that was slowly fading. David loved Maya. He truly did. But he carried a secret, a guilt that shadowed his every thought. A mistake, a failure, something he could never forgive himself for. And so, he pushed her away, convinced that distance would protect them both from the truth he feared to face. Maya felt the coldness in his eyes like a knife. She remembered the man who once held her hand with tenderness, who whispered promises of forever under the streetlights, who laughed at her jokes like they were the most important words in the world. Now, those memories felt like distant echoes, fading into the background of their quiet apartment. Evenings were worse. Dinner had become a ritual of silence. Conversations dissolved into arguments over trivial matters. The dishwasher left unemptied, a towel out of place, a word spoken too harshly. The smallest sparks ignited tension that neither of them had the courage to resolve. That night, after another tense meal and another failed attempt at normalcy, Maya retreated to their bedroom. She sat at the edge of the bed, her hands trembling slightly as she picked up her journal. She needed to reach him, to bridge the distance that had grown insurmountable. She began to write. The words poured out of her, raw and honest. She spoke of her love for him, her pain at the growing distance, her fear of losing the man she had once trusted with her heart. She wrote of hope, fragile but unwavering, that he might see her words and finally understand. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully, pressing it gently so it would fit perfectly on his bedside table. For a long moment, she stood there, silently wishing that he would read it. Not just see it, but truly read it, feel it, and let it touch the walls he had built around his heart. She left the room quietly, leaving the letter behind. It seemed simple enough, yet the paper held a weight that neither of them could foresee, a weight that would soon change everything. David returned home later that night, the city streets outside glowing with the harsh light of street lamps. The apartment was quiet, unnervingly quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. He dropped his bag on the floor and ran a hand through his hair, his mind tangled with frustration, fatigue, and a simmering anger he couldn't quite name. When he entered the bedroom, his eyes immediately fell on the letter resting neatly on the bedside table. His chest tightened. He reached for it, his fingers trembling slightly. The paper was ordinary, yet it radiated something he couldn't define, something that made the hair on his arms stand on end. He unfolded it slowly. Maya's words stared back at him, each line soaked in honesty and emotion. She wrote of love, of pain, of silent nights when she longed for him to speak, to hold her, to see her heart. She wrote of hope, that he could still open himself to her again. A lump formed in David's throat. Shame, guilt, anger. He hated himself for the tears the letter made him feel. He hated her for writing it, for reminding him of the man he wanted to be but wasn't. He crumpled the letter in his hands, feeling the paper tear slightly under the pressure, as if resisting his anger. And then, without thinking, he grabbed the letter and hurled it into the fireplace. The flames licked at the edges hungrily, curling the paper, blackening the words. He watched intently as it burned, imagining that with the fire consuming it, he could burn away the guilt, the fear, the emotions he had so desperately tried to ignore. The crackle of the fire filled the room. Sparks rose like tiny stars, illuminating his tense features. For a brief moment, he felt relief, as if a weight had been lifted from his chest. But then, a strange scent filled the room, faint and sweet, almost floral. He frowned, shaking his head. It was impossible. Nothing in the letter had smelled like that. The smell lingered, curling around him, making the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He peered in the fireplace. The ashes glowed red, faint shapes of words still visible in the blackened paper. It was as though the letter had left a trace of itself behind, a shadow that refused to vanish. David's heart thudded. He told himself it was imagination, the mind playing tricks on a guilty soul. He turned away, exhaling sharply, trying to convince himself that the act of burning the letter had freed him. Yet, in the pit of his stomach, a small, insistent unease began to grow. Something about that paper, about her words, refused to be silenced. David went to bed that night with the fire crackling low behind him. Sleep came fitfully, his dreams restless, haunted by fragments of her letter, echoes of her voice whispering in his ears. In the quiet darkness, he could almost see the edges of the paper curling back to him, a phantom presence he could neither touch nor escape. As the city slept outside, David lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the first stirrings of fear mingled with guilt. The letter had been burned, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly gone. And deep inside, he sensed, even if he didn't yet understand why, that this simple piece of paper was far more powerful than he could imagine. Its words would not stay buried in ash. Something was coming, something inevitable, and David would have to face it. David woke to the sound of sunlight streaming through the tall windows, spilling golden light across the bedroom. He blinked, still half asleep, and reached instinctively for the bedside table. The letter was there. His stomach dropped. He froze, staring at it as if his eyes might deceive him. The flames of last night's fireplace should have destroyed it completely, turned every word to ash. But the paper was perfectly intact, folded neatly, resting exactly where he had left it. "No," he whispered, his voice hoarse. It can't be." He reached out and picked it up, trembling. The paper felt solid, normal, but the weight in his hands was heavier than ever. For a moment, he wondered if he had dreamed the previous night, if the fire had really consumed it, or if he was losing his mind. He went to the kitchen, thinking that maybe leaving it there would stop whatever was happening. He placed it on the counter, turned back, and went about making coffee. When he returned moments later, it was back on his bed. Panic set in. David tried to reason with himself. "It's just paper," he muttered. "It's coincidence." But deep down, he knew it wasn't. He crumpled the letter, tore it in half, threw the pieces in the trash, and even flushed some down the toilet. Still, the next morning, it appeared on his bed, pristine, the words unchanged. He burned it again, this time in the fireplace, until the edges curled and blackened. He watched the flames consume it, trying to imagine relief. The ashes fell silently, but when he bent closer, he could swear he saw faint traces of words lingering in the glowing embers. It was impossible, but the thought sent shivers down his spine. The letter's return was relentless. No matter where he put it, no matter what he did, it always found its way back. Sometimes it appeared on his pillow, folded neatly as though waiting for him. Other times it was on his chair or tucked into the pocket of his coat. The ordinary had become uncanny. The apartment itself began to feel strange. Shadows stretched longer, floors creaked in unfamiliar ways, and the air carried an almost imperceptible chill. David became obsessed. He couldn't focus at work, couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboard made him jump. Every whisper of the wind against the window felt like a warning. He muttered to himself constantly, pacing the apartment, trying to understand what was happening. The words on the letter seemed almost alive. Some mornings, the ink appeared slightly darker, almost glowing. Other times, phrases seemed to shift subtly, changing in tone as if reacting to his thoughts or his fear. It was as though the paper had a mind of its own, demanding attention, refusing to let him ignore the truth it carried. David's hands shook as he held it. "What do you want from me?" he whispered. "Why won't you leave me alone?" No answer came, only the silent insistence of the words written by the woman he loved. Maya's voice echoed in his mind, the honesty, the longing, the quiet hope. He felt a crushing weight in his chest, the guilt he had tried to burn away returning tenfold. Sleep became impossible. He spent nights sitting in the dark, staring at the letter, sometimes whispering apologies, sometimes begging for it to stop. The city outside hummed with life, oblivious to the terror unfolding in one small apartment. His isolation grew. Friend called, asked if he was okay. He snapped at them, then immediately regretted it, retreating further into himself. The apartment, once modern and orderly, now felt alive in a sinister way. Floors creaked when no one was walking. Cold drafts drifted across the rooms. Shadows lingered longer than they should. Everywhere he went, David felt the letter's presence pressing on him, relentless and inescapable. He was caught in a cage of his own making, forced to face the emotions he had spent years hiding: the love, the regret, the fear, and the guilt. And in the quiet of the night, when the city was asleep, he began to realize that this was no ordinary paper. It was not just a letter, it was a mirror. It reflected everything he had tried to ignore, everything he had failed to confront, everything he still feared to lose. David sank into a chair, exhausted, head in his hands. The letter lay untouched on the table before him, silent, patient, unyielding. And in that moment, he knew, deep in his bones, that he could never run from it. Not now, not ever. The letter had returned, and it would not stop until he finally faced the truth. David sat in the dark of his apartment, the city outside alive with sounds he barely noticed anymore. The letter lay on the table before him, silent yet heavy, as if it carried not just words, but the weight of his life. He couldn't stop looking at it. He couldn't stop thinking about Maya. Sleep had abandoned him weeks ago. Nights were long and restless, filled with visions of her face, her eyes searching for the man she once knew. He remembered the laughter that had once filled their apartment, the late-night walks, the whispered dreams of a future together. Those memories were sharp now, piercing like ice through his chest, each one a reminder of what he had thrown away, or had tried to. He thought of every harsh word, every silent dinner, every cold glance he had offered her over the years. His pride, his fear, his refusal to face the truth. They had built walls too high to see over. And the letter was like a key, forcing him to confront everything he had tried to hide, everything he had refused to face. "I still love you," he whispered to the empty room, the words barely audible. The letter seemed to quiver under his gaze, as though acknowledging the confession. He hated himself for being weak. He hated himself for letting fear dictate his life. He hated himself for not being able to love her properly, even now, when he knew he should have been giving everything he had. Flashbacks came unbidden. He saw their first date, Maya laughing at his clumsy joke, her hand brushing against his, the sparkle in her eyes. He remembered their wedding day, the way she had looked at him like he was the only person in the world, her smile radiant with hope and trust. He had loved her then with all his heart, but somewhere along the way he had faltered. Life had grown heavy, mistakes had piled up, and guilt had taken root. He had stopped being the man she needed, and in doing so, he had pushed her away. Now, the letter forced him to see himself clearly. Its words weren't just hers. They were a reflection of him. Each phrase mirrored his own failings, his own fears, his own regrets. He realized with a sinking heart that it wasn't punishment. It was truth, a truth he could no longer ignore. David ran his hands over his face, trying to hold back tears he had long denied. He thought of how fragile love could be, how easily it could slip away when neglected. Pride had been his prison, fear his chains. And now, at the mercy of this single, relentless piece of paper, he had no choice but to confront everything he had hidden from himself. "I'm scared," he admitted aloud, voice shaking. "I'm scared I've lost you, that I don't deserve you, that I never will." The letter sat still, silent, yet it seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, as if acknowledging the truth in his words. David realized then that the paper was more than just words on a page. It was a mirror of the heart, a reflection of the soul. And it demanded honesty. Hours passed, though it felt like days. David stared at the letter, thinking, reflecting, remembering. Each memory was a knife and a bomb at once. Painful in its clarity, yet necessary for understanding. He saw how his fear of vulnerability had caused him to retreat, how his inability to forgive himself had built walls around both his heart and hers. For the first time, he truly understood the power of what Maya had given him. Not just a letter, but a chance. A chance to see himself as he was, to face the mistakes he had made, and perhaps, if he was brave enough, to try to make things right. David exhaled a long, shuddering breath, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of resolve. The letter had forced him to see the truth. Now, he knew that he could no longer run. He could no longer hide. Tomorrow, he promised himself he would try. Tomorrow, he would begin to face not just the letter, but Maya, and the man he had failed to be for all these years. But tonight, he would sit with the weight of his guilt, the echo of his love, and the realization that the letter was more than paper. It was a living reminder of everything that mattered, and everything he could still fight to save. David couldn't take it anymore. The apartment, once a safe haven, now felt like a trap. The letter's presence pressed on him constantly, a relentless reminder of the truth he had tried to bury. He needed distance, any distance, from the paper, from Maya's words, from himself. That night, he packed a small bag and left the apartment, pretending he had business to attend to. He stayed with a friend, sitting in the dim living room, staring at the walls as if they might offer answers. He tried to convince himself that being away would bring relief. But relief never came. The next morning, when he returned to the apartment, the letter was back, folded neatly on his bed, and scathed, demanding to be seen. David's stomach twisted. He rushed to check every corner, convinced someone must have slipped it back, though he lived alone. There was no one. Only the letter, its words unchanged, its presence unavoidable. He tried again. He left the apartment earlier, spending days at work late, pretending endless tasks kept him busy. He stayed at friends' homes, hotels, anywhere but the bedroom where the letter waited. And each time, without fail, it returned. On his pillow, folded neatly on his chair, even tucked into his coat pocket when he thought he had left it behind. Fear began to gnaw at him. He was no longer just frustrated or guilty. He was desperate, panicked. The apartment seemed alive with whispers and shadows. Floors creaked when no one walked. Drafts chilled his skin even in the summer. Lights flickered for no reason. Each ordinary sound now carried the weight of threat. His friends noticed changes. "David, you've been acting strange," one said gently. "I'm fine," David snapped, then immediately regretted it. Irritation, paranoia, and exhaustion made him lash out at the smallest provocations. He retreated further into isolation, avoiding company, avoiding conversation, avoiding everything that reminded him of a normal life. The psychological toll was relentless. He barely ate. He barely slept. His thoughts circled endlessly. The letter, Maya, his failures, his fear. He felt cornered, suffocated by the presence of something he could neither destroy nor escape. And yet, even in his panic, he could feel the letter's strange pull. It was as if it thrived on his obsession, feeding on his fear, forcing him to confront himself. He wanted to throw it away, burn it, hide it forever, but part of him knew that would not end the ordeal. Every attempt to escape only heightened his sense of helplessness. He was trapped in his own guilt, pursued by a paper that refused to be ignored. The apartment, once familiar, now reflected his inner turmoil. Its shadows, drafts, and faint creaks mirrored the fear and frustration inside him. David sat on the edge of his bed one night, head in his hands, staring at the letter. He realized that running wasn't the solution. He could leave, he could hide, he could burn, but it would always return. Because the letter was not just a piece of paper. It was a reflection of his conscience, a mirror of the heart, a reminder of the love he had neglected and the man he had failed to be. A cold shiver ran down his spine as he understood, fully and finally. He could no longer escape. The letter had found him wherever he went, inside and out, in body and soul. It would not relent. Exhausted and trembling, David finally admitted aloud what he had been avoiding for weeks. I can't run from this. I can't run from her, or from myself. And in that moment, the apartment seemed to hold its breath, as if the shadows themselves listened. David had reached a turning point. The letter had forced him to confront his helplessness, his fear, and the inescapable truth. Until he faced his emotions and the pain he had caused, there would be no peace. The attempts to escape had failed, but the lesson had begun to take root. The first step forward, he realized, would not be running, but understanding. David sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the letter once again. The apartment was silent, but the weight in the room felt heavier than ever. Each crease, each curve of Maya's handwriting seemed to hold more meaning than the last. He realized he could no longer ignore it. Running had failed. Burning had failed. Denial had failed. If he wanted peace, he would have to understand. He began researching late into the night, poring over books, online forums, and old records on spiritual phenomena and unexplainable occurrences. He read about karmic justice, objects that seemed to carry energy, and the idea that some things, some messages, could reflect not just reality, but the truth of one's heart. The words of Maya's letter came alive in his mind as he read. Every phrase, every tender plea, suddenly seemed like more than paper. It wasn't punishing him. It was holding up a mirror. It was forcing him to confront the mistakes he had made, the love he had neglected, the fear he had allowed to control him. David's thoughts drifted back to the early days of their relationship. He remembered the way Maya's laughter had lit up the room, the way she had believed in him with a kind of unwavering trust, the long nights of whispered dreams and shared promises. Those memories were sharp, almost painful in their clarity. He realized how far he had drifted, how easily he had allowed pride, fear, and guilt to erect walls between them. He thought of the small hurts, the ignored texts, the nights he had left her alone, the times he had failed to be emotionally present. The letter wasn't just a plea. It was a record of every moment he had failed to honor her heart. And now, through its uncanny persistence, it demanded that he face the consequences of his emotional neglect. David's hands shook as he held the letter. He whispered apologies into the dark, but the words felt hollow until he made a decision. If he could not undo the past, he could at least begin to repair it. He grabbed a pen and a fresh sheet of paper and began writing. The words flowed slowly at first, clumsy and raw. Confessions of guilt, declarations of love, admissions of fear, and pleas for forgiveness. Writing these letters became a ritual. Each one was an attempt to untangle the knots of shame and pride that had bound him for years. He wasn't sure if Maya would ever read them, if she could forgive him, or if they could rebuild what had been broken. But he had to try. He had to speak the truth, even if it terrified him. As he wrote, memories of Maya's small kindnesses and patient gestures returned. The way she would make tea, just the way he liked it. The way she smiled, even when he ignored her, the time she had stayed awake worrying about him. These moments weighed heavily on his heart. The letters he wrote were not just words to her. They were words to himself, a way to recognize and face his own failures. By morning, David felt exhausted, but different. The obsessive panic that had gripped him for weeks had eased slightly. He realized that the letter had never been a curse. It had been a teacher. It had shown him the parts of himself he had tried to hide, the love he had tried to ignore, and the courage he had to find. For the first time in a long time, he understood that healing would not come from escaping or destroying the letter, but from facing it, and facing himself. The path forward was clear, though difficult. He had to confront Maya, speak honestly, and lay bare the fears, the guilt, and the love that had been buried for far too long. David looked at the letter one last time before placing it carefully on the table. It seemed almost to shimmer faintly in the morning light, as if acknowledging that he had taken the first step toward understanding. A fragile sense of hope stirred within him. He wasn't free yet, but he had begun the journey. The letter had forced him to see the truth, and now he was ready to act on it. Tomorrow, he promised himself, he would face Maya. He would face the past, the mistakes, and the pain. And perhaps, if he found the courage, they could begin to heal together. The letter remained still, silent, yet its presence no longer felt oppressive. It was a guide, a reflection, a call to honesty. And David, for the first time in weeks, felt that maybe he could answer. David's hands shook as he stood outside the bedroom door. The letter he had struggled with for weeks lay folded neatly on the table behind him, silent yet commanding. His heart pounded, a mix of fear, guilt, and hope coursing through his veins. He had thought he could avoid this moment, that running, ignoring, or burning the letters would somehow protect him. But now he knew that protection lay in honesty, in facing Maya and himself fully. He opened the door slowly. Maya was sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes wide with quiet anticipation, the same gentle hope he had once cherished. She looked older somehow, not in age, but in the weight of unspoken pain, the longing that had grown in the silence between them. David's voice trembled. "Maya, I need to talk to you. I have to say things I should have said a long time ago." She nodded softly, her hands clasped in her lap. "I've been waiting," she said quietly, her tone calm, yet filled with emotion. "I wrote those letters because I needed you to see me, to see us." The words hit him harder than he expected. He felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, the same tears he had fought to hold back for weeks. "I know," he whispered. "I read them, and I tried to, I don't know, ignore them, destroy them. But I can't. I can't escape what they mean, what they show about me." Maya's gaze softened, a mixture of sadness and hope. "I didn't write them to punish you," she said. "I wrote them because I love you. I needed you to remember that we had something worth fighting for." David sank onto the edge of the bed beside her, his hands trembling as he took hers. The warmth of her touch broke through the walls he had built around his heart. "I've been so afraid of failing you, of letting you down, of facing my own mistakes," he admitted. "I pushed you away because I thought I deserved the distance, but I love you. I've always loved you. And I'm so sorry for everything." Maya's eyes glistened with tears. "David, I never stopped loving you. I just needed you to see me, to be present with me, to let me in." A silence fell over the room, heavy and profound. It was not awkward. It was necessary. Every unspoken word, every regret, every fear hung in the air, demanding recognition. And in that shared silence, a bridge began to form between them. David pulled a deep breath, feeling the weight of weeks lift slightly from his chest. "The letters, they weren't just words," he said softly. "They were a reflection of everything I've ignored, of every time I failed to be there. And I understand now. I understand that I can't run, I can't hide. I have to face it, face you, face myself." Maya's fingers tightened around his. "And I've been waiting for that," she said, a small, fragile smile forming. "Waiting for you to come back to us, to come back to me." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. The apartment around them seemed to breathe with them. The shadows softened, the creaks faded, and for the first time in weeks, there was a sense of calm. The letter lay on the table, silent, no longer a weapon, no longer a source of fear. It had done its work. It had guided him to honesty, vulnerability, and reconnection. David whispered, "I can't promise I won't fail again. I can't promise I'll always know the right words or the right actions. But I can promise. I'll try. I'll never stop trying to be the man you believed in, the man I want to be for you." Maya's tears fell freely now, but her smile was unwavering. "That's all I've ever wanted," she said. "To see you try. To see us try." They embraced, long and quietly, a reconnection forged from honesty, vulnerability, and love. The tension that had gripped them both seemed to dissolve with each heartbeat. For David, the fear, the guilt, the obsession, all of it faded into a new clarity. He realized that love, though fragile, could endure when faced honestly. The letter, once a symbol of conflict and supernatural persistence, now rested quietly on the table. Its presence was no longer threatening. It had become a testament to their journey, to the struggles they had endured and the steps they had taken toward healing. In that room, bathed in the soft glow of the city lights, David and Maya shared their first truly honest conversation in years. Words flowed freely, mingling apologies with declarations of love, regrets with promises. They were not fully healed, but the first cracks of restoration were visible, fragile but real. For the first time in a long time, David felt hope. The letter had brought him to this moment, not through punishment, but through revelation. And as they held each other, he understood that the path forward would be one of effort, care, and emotional honesty. And in that quiet embrace, amidst the remnants of fear and the echoes of past mistakes, David and Maya took the first steps toward healing together, knowing that their love, though tested, had survived. The morning sunlight spilled gently through the tall windows, painting the apartment in warm golds and soft shadows. For the first time in weeks, David woke without the heavy weight of guilt pressing on his chest. The letter lay on the table, slightly worn, edges singed from previous attempts to destroy it, but intact. It no longer felt threatening. It was a reminder, a marker of the journey he had endured and the lessons he had learned. Maya was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. The sound was familiar, comforting, like a thread weaving them back together. David watched her from the doorway, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in months. He took a deep breath, letting the simple act of seeing her, alive and present, fill him with quiet gratitude. He walked over and kissed her on the cheek. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," she replied, glancing up with a small, genuine smile. It was fragile, but it carried the promise of something enduring. They ate breakfast together, talking about small things, the hum of daily life, but underneath it ran a current of something deeper. The shared understanding that they had survived a storm and that they were willing to try again. Words of resentment and fear had given way to laughter, gentle teasing, and moments of ease that had long been absent. Afterward, David sat by the window, the letter resting quietly on the table beside him. He picked it up and studied it, tracing the worn edges with his fingers. He remembered the nights of obsession, the fear, the sleepless hours, and the weight of his own guilt. And he realized that every moment had led him to this. A chance to see clearly, to recognize the importance of honesty, vulnerability, and love. He thought about Maya, her unwavering patience, and her courage in speaking her heart despite knowing the risks. He thought about himself, the walls he had built, the fear he had let dominate his life. And he understood that the letter was more than words on paper. It had been a bridge, a guide, and a mirror of the heart. David reflected quietly on how fragile love could be. It could break in silence, fade under neglect, and vanish when one refused to confront their own emotions. But it could also endure, grow, and heal when met with honesty and effort. He knew they had a long road ahead, filled with conversations, shared vulnerabilities, and moments that would test them again. Yet for the first time, he felt a sense of hope that their bond could withstand the trials. Maya joined him by the window, leaning her head gently against his shoulder. They watched the city wake slowly below, the streets filled with life continuing beyond their apartment. In that quiet, simple moment, David felt a sense of peace, a fragile but tangible assurance that they were moving forward together. The letter remained on the table, slightly charred but preserved, a quiet witness to their journey. It was no longer a symbol of fear or supernatural punishment. It had become a testament to growth, understanding, and the possibility of second chances. Its words had guided him, forced him to confront himself, and ultimately led him to this fragile reconciliation. David whispered softly, more to himself than anyone else, "Thank you for showing me what matters." Maya smiled faintly, resting her hand over his. He squeezed it gently, and in that small gesture, a promise was exchanged, a commitment to care, to communicate, and to nurture the love they had nearly lost. Outside, the world continued its rhythm, but inside the apartment, there was a new quiet, one born not of tension or fear, but of understanding and healing. The past would always be a shadow, but the future, fragile though it might be, held the possibility of enduring love. And as the sunlight fell across the room, illuminating the letter in their hands entwined, David realized that love, though tested and fragile, could survive when faced honestly, courageously, and with an open heart.